Welcome to the closing plenary session of this conference on possibilities and potential of global collaboration. I'd like to thank the team leads and parallel theme participants for their wonderful summaries that we are following. And I am Roseann O'Reilly Runte, President and CEO of the Canada Foundation for Innovation. Et avec moi, j'ai deux personnes extraordinaires. Monsieur Jean-Éric Paquet, directeur général pour la recherche et l'innovation pour la Commission européenne, and Simon Kennedy, my Deputy Minister of Innovation, Science and Economic Development for Canada. Both are respected and extraordinarily experienced leaders. Mr. Kennedy has held 6 deputy minister appointments in Canada, including the Privy Council, Foreign Affairs, Industry, International Trade, Industry, Science and Economic Development, and Health during the opioid crisis. He and Mr. Paquet share international education and are global scholars. Mr. Paquet has served in a number of portfolios, including transportation, international relations, innovation, radio navigation, policy coordination, as ambassador to Mauritania, director of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and for the Western Balkans. Both extraordinary people, and as this conference draws to a close, it's appropriate that we bring them together and continue and ask them how we can continue the engagement fostered by the wonderful conversation that we've held over this week. And we must move forward. And I'm going to ask them to start with their deep thoughts and their rose-colored glasses and tell us what they think are some of the potentials and possibilities for global collaboration as we look to the future. Mr. Kennedy?
Thanks, Roseann. It's great to be here. Jean-Éric, it's great to see you as well. Just in terms of the potential for international science collaboration, I guess what I would say is that science has always been, in one form or another, an international endeavor, whether it was a collaborative endeavor or whether it was the maybe haphazard exchange of ideas. No one society and certainly no one country has a monopoly on ideas. And if you look at the big problems that we face as a global community, and the big questions that are out there, increasingly those are global problems and those are global questions that need to be solved, and they depend on scientific collaboration. I think the COVID-19 pandemic really brings that into focus. There's been a lot of press coverage, for example, about vaccine competition and about the rise of nationalism and so on. But what we can't lose sight of is that the rapid development of vaccines, the tracking of the virus around the world, this has been a triumphant time for international scientific collaboration. And certainly, when I work with our scientists and when I sit with the policymakers in Canada from the health community, it's quite clear that we're depending very heavily on international scientific collaboration to track the emergence of new variants, to understand the epidemiology of this particular disease. And the development of therapies has also been an international endeavor. So, we depend as societies on international scientific collaboration, and we can be very grateful that we have an international scientific community that's been able to come together to very rapidly bring solutions to the forefront in confronting a challenge such as COVID-19. And we need the same kind of collaboration, and there is the same kind of work going on in other areas, such as tackling, confronting the challenge of climate change and adaptation to climate change, and how to address the technological problems and the societal problems arising from a changing climate. So I think it's a time when international scientific collaboration is needed more than ever, and it's a time when I think we see actually the possibilities of international scientific collaboration more than ever. So maybe I'll stop there and give Jean-Éric a chance to weigh in. Thanks.
Mr. Paquet?
Thanks, Simon. Thanks, Roseann. And maybe just to say that I was also very impressed and pleased with the discussions, interaction, and I think the agenda which is emerging from this week. And I hope that in our short discussion and in our interaction then with the audience, we can allow to close it effectively, so that we can then also use all that energy and these ideas to bring the agenda forward together in this global context, as Simon very well, I think, put it. I don't think I have anything to add to what he set out. What I, from my perspective, could maybe say is that I think that research infrastructures are increasingly seeing themselves as very central actors of science, not just places where scientists come together and benefit from, in many cases, an absolutely amazing scientific service, but full actors of science and research development. And in the context of the pandemic, I think this was particularly powerful, be it in the context of data sharing. You probably are aware that EMBL, together with the Commission, created the COVID-19 data platform, fully open to the world. We had tens of thousands of sequences put there, tens of thousands of scientists from all over the globe coming to share their results and use results from others, and obviously also the results of scientific publications being shared on that platform. And this really made EMBL a major actor with many other endeavors of the pandemic. I think the pandemic, Simon, I don't know if you would agree, also shows that indeed science collaboration allowed us to be so spectacularly fast in sequencing the genome and then developing this vaccine. I also observed that it has nevertheless, in some cases, and you mentioned vaccine nationalism, also brought us back a little bit in national regional context. So I think that we really need to pay attention to that, because global collaboration will be needed. And if I can take maybe one example where I think we are now in a better place than we were 6 months ago, but more needs to be done, is in developing platforms for trials, therapeutics, vaccines. This was much too fragmented in the first months, including because this was done in absolute urgency. But these types of infrastructures, networked infrastructures, are going to be particularly powerful and important beyond, obviously, what is done by the industry. I think public actors also here have a lot to do in the context of the pandemic. But there are many, many examples where we will, I hope, in the future, including as a follow-up to the conference, do more. And I'm sure, Roseann, you'll come back to also climate change and sustainability, where I think more will absolutely need to be done.
So as we talk about science as the problem solver, and we look ahead to the world, we're all looking at the climate and what we can do for the environment. And I think that we've heard in the conference great goodwill to come together to solve other problems like the environment. But in our efforts to solve those problems, do we risk losing the individual discoveries, the pure science for the joy of science that may someday be used to solve a problem, but not? And when we put all our resources towards a single problem, is that necessarily a good thing? And how do we keep some kind of balance, or is balance necessary?
Well, Roseann, if you allow me, Simon, to kick off, Roseann, I would love to see that we put all our resources in tackling climate change. This, unfortunately, is not yet the case, even if we are today in a different place than we were a few months ago. And I hope very much that the developments, the political developments around climate change in the US, in China, will indeed spur these much greater investments in deploying existing technologies, but indeed also put the necessary resources to sustain the needed climate science and to develop the technologies, and also to test these technologies with society as we move forward. So I would argue that we certainly will need to do more there. I don't think this will distract us, Roseann, from fundamental science and research, where infrastructures play such a central role. And just again, COVID-19 illustrates how this needs to be brought together and is being brought together. The messenger RNA is very basic science. The founder of BioNTech, the key vaccine today, is today still, as we speak, a grantee of the European Research Council. So this is really disruptive basic research at its best, and it has immediately, spectacularly brought these results and will, I'm sure, allow our societies to move back to normal now in the foreseeable future. So there will be no loss of efforts done, I expect, globally on this fundamental research. And the same therefore goes also into the necessary investments in infrastructure. And Roseann, to finish, maybe I think I can certainly count also on scientific communities to remind my boss and ministers of research in member states, and I'm sure Simon is reminded every day as well, that there are many, many areas which require attention and fiscal resources.
So Roseann, I guess maybe what I would say is I feel like this debate about fundamental versus applied science or discovery science versus science that's maybe focused on big problems has been going on for a very long time. I'm not sure that there's an answer to it. I very much agree with Jean-Eric. I think we can't necessarily say that scientific work on one big problem area might not yield all sorts of important insights that will be relevant to other problems that we face as a society. And I see, for example, like the Canadian government is providing a lot of support to the development of artificial intelligence technologies and machine learning. We've seen in the pandemic that that AI has been extremely important for drug discovery and for work in the development of new therapies. Quantum materials, quantum science is an area that the government in Canada has spent a lot of time and energy supporting. There are potentially significant applications of quantum science to climate change. And so whether you're working on more fundamental research or whether you're working on, whether you're thinking you're working on solving some of these big problems, I think there's a great deal of leakage and crossover between applied and fundamental science and science that's perhaps just kind of more discovery based and science that's maybe a bit more applied at looking at big problems. So, I think that in some respects, I think the debate's a little artificial. If we look at one of our biggest science facilities in Canada, the Triumph, the cyclotron in British Columbia, that was built in the 1970s. It's focused on kind of fundamental physics, but it's had significant discoveries and has done a lot to advance work in medical isotopes, work on quantum computing, high temperature superconductors. This kind of this large science facility that's really doing this kind of really amazing, looking at big questions has actually led to a lot of applied outcomes. So I tend to think that the debate is a little artificial, personally.
Okay, well, we have these wonderful big science facilities, and I think that there are two things that we can consider with them. One is, can the facilities themselves contribute to the good use of energy and be contributors to a good climate of the world? And then the second one is, as we build them, and we live through pandemics and people can't travel, how much do crises like the pandemic slow this down? Or do they make us look for other ways electronically where we can use the equipment? Mm-hmm. Is there a good and a bad side, or what? How do you view that?
Well, Jean-Eric, did you want to go first?
Go ahead. Exactly. Precisely. Go ahead.
Well, I get asked this question a lot actually, Roseann, and not necessarily just in the context of science or major science infrastructure, but just more generally, like how has the pandemic affected my role as a senior civil servant in the government and the work that we do? And I often borrow that line from A Tale of Two Cities. It's the best of times and it's the worst of times. I think clearly. The cessation of international travel, the necessity of social distancing, a lot of the new realities we've had to adopt because of the pandemic, they've obviously put a crimp on ways that we used to engage and in our ability to do certain things. What I think is also interesting, though, is the pandemic has, as I mentioned at the outset of our conversation, the pandemic has actually accelerated new ways of working together and has revealed anew the importance of collaboration and the and the huge contribution that science can bring to the table. So while I think yes, it's more difficult, I suppose, to if you're in Canada to travel to CERN or to go to Paris for a meeting, but at the same time we've actually seen in real time the huge contribution that international scientific collaboration can bring to the table. And what's interesting is we have technologies. I mean, this virtual conference is proof of that. The discussions that have taken place over the last number of days is proof of that. This conversation is proof that we have technologies and we have capability now to overcome some of the barriers that used to be there, and collaborate and can continue to work together. The other thing too, without wanting to get too philosophical, but it is in a crisis that the crisis kind of creates a pressure cooker environment that brings people together, and we've certainly seen that. If I think, for example, Canada's been part of this mechanical ventilator Milano initiative, which has brought together private sector partners and governments from Canada, Australia, Europe, the U.S. To develop a ventilator model that's easy to produce, off the shelf, something that can be made available in countries without a lot of health infrastructure. We have our VITO vaccine, the International Vaccine Center in Canada at the University of Saskatchewan that's working with the WHO and a number of countries on vaccine research. Clinical trials are being run around the world, but because you have to go to where the clinical trial environment is most hospitable in order to kind of advance the science. So, COVID-19 has been both a huge challenge for the global community. It has also been a huge demonstration of the power of international scientific collaboration. So I think the question is there's kind of two sides to the question, and we won't really know, I think, for some time exactly what the shakeout of this will be. But my prediction will be it will accelerate the understanding, and it will accelerate the kind of policy making that will facilitate these kinds of international collaborations. I think just in the same way that it's potentially driven a bit of nationalism internationally on the necessity of having certain, say, production capacity in your own country and concerns about the vaccine supply chain, it's also underlined for scientists and for the scientific community the necessity of open data, the necessity of collaboration, and we see this now, and with climate change, look at the way in which the pandemic, I would argue, has accelerated. You might have thought with a pandemic that actually people will be so preoccupied that some of these other problems might take a back seat, and then the exact opposite has happened. So I think, it's just my own personal view, but yes, we face these restrictions, but at the same time, we also have had a signature lesson on the value of working together.
Yeah. No, Simon, I completely agree. I think we will on the contrary have more and more closely knit together teams internationally, because that can be done now in a much more straightforward way in this hybrid and digital format. So that is going to be staying with us over time. You alluded to open science. I think this is also one area where I think this will not be, it should not be possible. It will not be possible to go back on open access publications in particular. I mean, peer-reviewed articles were shared immediately in open access during the pandemic, and that I think has shown that even 6 months make a major difference, and we should make this available widely immediately. I also think that the pandemic has shown the value of the investments we did over time in these infrastructures. I mean, I spoke of EMBL, there are many other examples. I mean, of course, the very first phase of the pandemic has had some impact as we were rearranging ourselves. I mean, in Arctic science, for example, we lost a season to a large extent, and that is no doubt the case. But as we move forward, I'm also very, very optimistic. I saw few delays in the deployment of infrastructures being built, these European Spallation Source or ITER. There are no delays which you can connect per se to the pandemic. I think, nevertheless, what we also need to be aware of and therefore deal with is that the nature of ideas coming together in a real physical environment, in a lab or in a conference, this we are losing a little bit. So I would argue that where the connections existed, the human team connections existed, bringing it forward and probably faster and in some cases better was absolutely what was happening. In areas where this was less closely knit, I think the pandemic has had more impact. So as we move into a hybrid new normal, I think this will certainly be taken into account.
We've had two such inspiring, extraordinary speakers to bring this conference to a close. I'm really sorry to actually say we're going to now have a question period et on peut répondre aux questions en anglais et en français.
Yeah.
Mais je me sens tout à fait inspirée. I am totally inspired by your words, and I think we are so fortunate to have wonderful scientists in the world and infrastructure that supports their work so ably and admirably, and government leaders that believe in the work that everyone's doing. So thank you so much, and thank you for staying and answering the questions that we will have to end this conference. Thank you.